Next up is In Tété's Footsteps, an expedition inspired by Togo-born explorer Tété-Michel Kpomassie, and his acclaimed book, An African in Greenland. And the expedition intends to answer the questions: who gets to tell the story of a place? Does cultural connection manifest differently in the images and stories collected by the expeditioners based on who they are? And how do cultures interact with expeditioners as storytellers of color? This expedition is led by Lola Akinmade Åkerström, and she is joined by expedition mates Na Sarawiwa and Eric Yaroker. So Lola and team, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. So I'm going to be presenting our cultural expedition to Greenland, inspired by Tété-Michel Kpomassie.
I was born in Africa, but the first time in my life, a girl told me, "I love you." It was in Inuit. As a kid, I will never forget that. As a kid, I love you, and I could not believe. I have never heard. That was during all my journeys. When I traveled to Africa and I came to Senegal, I went to Mauritania, to Algiers, etc. Because of their religions, they didn't want me to have any contact with their daughters, with their girls, but in Greenland opened its arms, so I think that is something I will never forget. I was born in Africa.
All right. So meet Tété-Michel Kpomassie, a modern day explorer. He never climbed Everest. He didn't ski to the North Pole or the South Pole. But in 1965, he became the first African on a cultural expedition to live with the indigenous Inuit for many years in Greenland. And this year, Tété turned 80 and is going to be moving back to Greenland to spend the rest of his years. So, who gets to tell the story of a place? Are these visual stories shaped and tainted through our own lived lenses? Do cultures interact differently with storytellers of color? And is this difference clearly visible in the resulting work? So Tété's book, which was published in 1977, was a subconscious attempt to answer some of those pertinent questions. 45 years later, we are still asking the same questions because we still haven't diversified who gets to tell the story of a place with authority, especially as immigrants. So inspired by his book, our expedition is going to answer that overarching question of who gets to tell the story of a place, and if cultural connection manifests differently in the images and the stories we bring back based on who the storytellers are. We plan to spend time with Tété, including revisiting some parts of Greenland with him in person, as well as conducting interviews. So our expedition seeks to provide insights regarding the following: cultural connection within travel writing and photography, diversity and true inclusion within storytelling from marginalized voices, and it's going to be a case study on tone, voice, and sensitivity when reporting indigenous stories by storytellers also from marginalized communities. So I'd like to introduce my team. So I am a visual storyteller, a photographer, and an author. And to this expedition, I'm bringing those visual storytelling skills. I'm going to be the lead photographer as well as providing that cinematic art direction. And why this expedition inspires me personally is as an African who lives in the Nordics, who writes about the Nordics, who spends time with indigenous Sami in the Nordics and the Arctic. Tété's footsteps was what inspired my new reality. No?
Hi, my name's Nos Sarawiwa. I'm an author and travel journalist. I'm also an amateur photographer as well. And my book, my first book is called Looking for Transwonderland. It was based on my travels around Nigeria. And so through that book, I was examining my own culture as a diasporan. And it's very interesting. There are a lot of fault lines and minefields that you can fall into. Because, you know, whenever you have these discussions about colonialism and, you know, loss of indigenous culture, what you find is that the arguments on the ground are a lot more nuanced than you imagine. And yeah, I'm really, you know, excited about this project. I read Tété-Michel's book about 20 years ago when I visited his home country, Togo. And I was just amazed, blown away by the quality of, you know, the ethnology in the book. You know, he really explored Greenlandic society from, you know, a very deep anthropological perspective, and questions about hunting and culture, they relate to climate change. And so I'm just fascinated about, you know, what Greenlandic society looks like now, and what they're willing, you know, how they live their lives, and whether, you know, they would be able to look after themselves, for example, in times of like food insecurity brought on by war or climate change. You know, all of these things relate back to their culture and the parts of it that they've retained or let go of. And so, you know, these are really sort of interesting questions to me. They're fascinating questions. And, you know, Greenland is a place that people don't read about much. You know, there's something very mysterious about that community. And Kpomassie really brought it to life in his book. And I'd love for us to do the same, a sort of updated version of what he did.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, my name is Eric, and I'm a videographer and drone pilot, an avid traveler and explorer. And I will be doing the videography and the behind the scenes stills and the drone images on the expedition. And I think Tété's story and his life is just so unique. And at the same time, it carries something very universal to it. Like we saw in that very first video snippet. And Togo was actually one of the first African countries that I ever visited. So to be able to follow in Tété's footsteps and to continue exploring his story and his relationship to Greenland would just be so amazing.
Thank you.
I am rather honored. Yes, I am honored by your initiative. By you know, when I read about your project, I couldn't believe that you want to put my how do I say, achievement so high. Yeah, that is a great idea. Yeah. I was really honored.
Yeah. No, you're just, I mean, your journey was incredible on you know, on so many fronts. It was, you know, the journey just to get from Togo to Greenland itself was an odyssey. And, you know, for you as a Black man, and, you know, when you got there, the anthropological detail that you put into that book was just phenomenal. You know, this is,
Thank you. Thank you.
Know, I mean, with the title, you think, oh, it's good, you know, this is an African in Greenland and something, you know, but that wasn't even the main focus. You know, it was anyone, you know, reading it can take so much, you know, from it and really learn about their society. So yeah, I'm just in awe.
I am rather
Sorry.
honored.
Trying to take over to the.
I am honored.
There we go. So our expedition locations, right? 1 second there. Yes.
So what I will.
Sorry.
So what I,
It's like flipping crazy, my presentation, so I apologize. Bear with me. There we go. Get back to, there we go. So expedition locations. So Tété currently lives in France. And so the plan is to visit him there, but he's going to also be moving to Greenland before the end of the year. So by the time this expedition takes place next year, it's going to be based in Nuuk. So we're going to spend some time with him in Nuuk, and then we're going to visit these 4 communities in Greenland. These are the 4 locations where a young Kpomassie lived for extended periods of time, and they left lasting impressions on him. So Nuuk, which is the capital city, Ilulissat, which is known as the iceberg capital of the world, Qaqqottoq, and Sisimiut. Those are the 4 communities we'll be spending time in.
so what I will tell a young explorer going to Greenland will be to respect the Greenlandic culture.
So our expedition goals. Our goals, they are clear, they are direct, they are achievable, but they are also highly relevant because they determine who gains access in today's changing travel landscape. So we're going to bring back more diverse stories from Greenland, more inclusive modern day storytelling based on organic interaction and connection that don't exotify places and experiences, but rather lifts up our shared connections and humanity through vulnerability. We will be rooting our stories in the present day while tracing some of Tété's footsteps for comparison and historical reference. We're also going to be bringing back imagery showing Black African travelers in remote places. You can't be what you can't see is a phrase we commonly use with regards to representation. One of our main goals is to bring more imagery through photography and videography of Africans traveling in places as remote as Greenland. So as visual storytellers, we'll be using every single tool available to us, including but not limited to penning feature articles and visual essays for Eden Compass, short multimedia dispatches from the field, video and audio interviews with Tété and locals and the Greenlandic Inuits, live storytelling on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and a rich image bank of photography, video clips, and then we're going to be producing 1 full-length cinematic video covering the entire expedition. And this year, I was recently named the Asselblad heroine, which means I now have access to high-quality Asselblad gear to help us, our entire team, document this expedition. So just to summarize, there aren't many Black African travel writers, let alone Black African women storytellers, writing about place and culture and remote connection at the professional level that I and Know operate. By undertaking this expedition, we're changing the narrative in real time and blazing a trail for storytellers of colors while tracking in the footsteps of a maverick who inspired our careers. So I want to leave you with this quote. Diverse stories, whether narratives shaped by immigrants or other forms of inclusive storytelling, paint the places we experience as deeply human with vulnerabilities. This is what builds true cultural connection to the people we read about. A connection where we recognize our unmasked humanity in each other, while still appreciating the panoramic landscapes and physical beauty of what makes those places different.
Thank you for your initiative, which is very dear for me now. Now that I understand the spirit, the heart of your project. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
So much.
Have a wonderful evening. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola and team. We will again remind the audience that you should drop your questions in that Q&A function, and we'll be paying attention to that so we can make sure we ask them. But I want to get started with sort of a big question that might be a little bit difficult to answer, but Your main question of this expedition is about who gets to tell the story of a place. And it is, like you said, a very relevant question, but it's often also a heated question, a contentious question.
Yes.
And so we're curious as to how your team intends to navigate the emotional landscape of a global audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is also going to be rooted in my experience as a Black woman in the Nordics, where I've written extensively about my new home, and I've written about the culture, but I still get questioned, what, do you have the authority to write about this place? And I always say immigrants are usually the truth bearers of a culture, right? So with Tété, he wrote his book in 1977. It took the world decades to even know who he was. And it wasn't until they celebrated him turning 80 this year that people are like, oh, this guy is super cool. Why didn't I hear about this guy? It took him 10 years over land and then by ocean liner to get to Greenland. We are trying to do it in 2 weeks, right? So it took him, he traveled all across Africa, up through Europe, all by land, and then across. And his story is such a poignant story. It's one of those stories where we never hear because we don't get to diversify who tells those stories. And so he spent time. And one of the stories that Tété told us was when he was in Greenland, there was a French anthropologist, same age, that was there. And that French anthropologist brought all his food for a year, brought his own accommodations, set up camp. Tété helped him build, using local resources to build. The guy moves back to France and publishes a book. And Tété is like, but what did you learn? You didn't even interact, right? And Tété lived there and embedded. And so this is why it's really important for us to listen to other voices as well. And that first story we shared about Tété saying the first person that said, I love you to him, was a Greenlandic Inuit. So it's a very broad question. It's a very difficult question, but we need to start talking about it and addressing it, because until we start acknowledging issues, we won't be able to solve them, right? No, do you want to add some thoughts to that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a very kind of heated conversation, but I personally believe it doesn't need to be. I'm a firm believer that everyone has an interesting perspective to bring. As women, we can talk to people and get a certain kind of access. Men can also get a certain kind of access. Europeans will interact in certain ways that will give them an advantage and a disadvantage, and the same works for us. So, I feel that we're just simply adding to, the number of perspectives that, have covered Greenland. And I think it should just, be seen in that kind of way. I've noticed, for example, when I'm in Africa, watching the different ways in which people interact with me, depending on their age and their wealth or whatever. It's the world is a very complicated place, and I don't believe that that power and victimization, the fault line is always a racial one. Within Inuit society, you will find injustices as well. This is just a human story and a human issue. And, I hope that we can convey that to the audience.
With nuance, yes.
We have a question from an audience member, and the question is, are you ultimately looking to show what people from other cultures have in common?
I think part of that, but also a lot more nuance. What we're trying to show is if how people interact is based on also who they are interacting with. Because as a photographer, sometimes when I take photos of people, intimate portraits of people, strangers, sometimes there is a connection where I see in the eye where they feel seen, or there's a connection in the eye where they say, I don't want you taking my photo because you're not supposed to have what you're holding. You're not supposed to be bigger than me, right? So in a sense, we want to kind of go through and figure out not just what makes us similar, because we know what makes us similar. At the end of the day, we all want to be seen, acknowledged for what and who we already are. But it's also how much access, how much organic, natural, unfiltered access can you get? And like, no, she talked about, a woman can get you a different kind of access than a man, but then adding lots of intersectional layers to that. What kind of access? And also, we always say as travelers, not only do we travel as sponges, soaking up different cultures, but we also squeeze back out a bit of ourselves to foster that cultural understanding as well. That's what Tété did as well, being an African there, the first they ever saw. So in a way, it's a kind of two-way interaction.
Fascinating. Yes. And I also love to see that theme of connection through your proposal and your proposed expedition. And that connection can show up when we find similarities, but also when we acknowledge differences. We have another question from the audience that I'll read now, which is, would you want to share the story with children? And what would the message be?
Absolutely, absolutely. The story we will share is, and I'll give you a little anecdote, because this morning I had my son with me and I had a brown egg and a white egg, boiled both eggs. And then when he peeled them, it's like, wow, they're the same inside. I'm like, yes, the outside is different. The colors are different. Is there a blue egg? Yes, there's a little blue robin egg as well. But the output and the inside were all the same. And so these stories that we're going to bring back, the imagery, absolutely. It's going to be about, it's going to be so accessible. It's something we can share with children, to educate, to facilitate that cultural understanding, as well as it's also going to be rooted in the modern day. We are not about exotifying anything. It's about today. What's life today? What are the same challenges we're facing? What are the same similarities today? While referencing kind of what Tété experienced in the past. No, you want to add anything, Eric? Please jump in.
Well, when we spoke to Tété, he mentioned that he's going to do a lecture tours in all the different schools of Greenland. So hopefully we can come along to one of those schools and see how the Inuit children reacts and interacts and listens to what he has to tell them.
Yeah, and I think, climate change is a huge issue, particularly in Greenland. And I'm, really sort of interested in how they navigate that. You're on an island where you rely on imports, food imports, and your sort of hunting culture has kind of largely disappeared, but perhaps there are some people who have held on to it for one reason or another. And so I think those kind of issues are relevant to people of all ages, age groups, and that's a facet that I'd like to explore a lot.
Wonderful. I think that is all the questions those are all the questions we have time for today.
Yeah, and a huge thank you to both of the expedition teams for all of your hard work, for your presentations today. We're just thrilled, this being the inaugural Pathfinder Prize pitch event. We're thrilled with how it went, and we're thrilled with your ideas. So now for the agonizing wait on your end. And allies, this is the part where we turn things over to you and let you decide which expedition we fund.